Kiara, salam wa durud. I said hi in Persian. Before I start this presentation, I should thank Rutherford Discovery Fellowship, which most of the results and the work they've done in the last 1.5 years because of this fellowship that was given to Prof. Jamal, and he hired me to do the work in IDI, and also thank everyone in Campus for helping me to be set up in IDI Data Lab. And I would like to just read one poem from a Persian poet, which is the reason why all of us are doing studies and research for minority groups. It says, human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. This is from Saadi, that's a famous Persian poet. Navigating data in IDI to unlock refugee settlement trajectories. And this is the disclaimer, and I believe that Barry just covered this. So I quickly go to the refugee subgroups and refugees. What I'm going to cover, it's a lot of information about who are refugees in the country, how is their demographics, and then looking into a few of those outcomes which are related to their settlement in the country. Because if you want to see refugees who are actually and really integrated to the society and are powerful and are growing, we should look at how they do in the long term. So we have three main refugees groups in New Zealand. The main group is Quota refugees. These groups are referred by the UN High Commissioner and subsequently selected by Immigration New Zealand for residence. So once they arrive, they are residents. They receive their residency before they arrive in New Zealand. The second group is Refugee Family Support Category, and then a resettled refugee in New Zealand, they can support one family member and sponsor them for New Zealand residency. So this group is also coming to New Zealand with residency. The first group, Quota refugee, they've increased the number of quota. It used to be 750 a year. It increased to 1,000 a few years ago, and then 1,500 in 2020. But it never happened because of COVID. We never had 1,500 come into the country, but will be from the next year, hopefully. The family support category, there are 150 only a year that are coming to New Zealand. The Labour government increased this number to 300 a year. It's going to be 300, but we didn't have 300 up to this point. And then the third category of refugees are asylum seekers, those who come to New Zealand with some short-term visas, and then here they apply for asylum, and then they wait from a few months to a few years, and they receive or are being rejected for the claim. I identified a fourth category, and that was in the request of those people who are working closely with asylum seekers. And they were thinking about the story about those people who didn't receive, weren't approved for their claim, and they didn't receive a convention. So just tell you that in this study, I'm looking into databases, those who arrived between 1997 to 2019. So the asylum seeker subgroup is anyone who applied for asylum at some point, and then they stayed in the country. So they might have left the country 2 years afterwards, but they up to 2019, to the end of the time that I was looking at this cohort, they weren't convention refugees, so they didn't receive a refugee status. So I looked into immigration database, and I looked into everyone with a decision for refugee status, and then if they were connected to the spine and they had other information in the spine, so that I could connect them to other databases like Ministry of Health, Social Development, Education, and other databases, then I kept them. The main population that I looked at is adult population, adult refugees, those who arrived in New Zealand with a decision. At the time of the decision, they were aged between 16 and 65 years. And that gave me a big number, like about 25,000 refugees. Most of them, about 11,000 Quota refugees, 2,500 family, 5,400 convention refugees, and there were about 6,100 asylum seekers. That some of these asylum seekers over time, they became residents through other routes, not through the refugee route. So I'm just showing some demographics because there are quite significant differences. For example, in terms of age groups, you can see that like asylum and convention refugees have higher numbers of 30 to 40 years old. And this is at the time of arriving in New Zealand, applying for asylum or becoming a refugee at the time of a decision, the first decision being made on their case. And family, with about 16% of them arriving at the age of 50 and more, were the group that was significantly had more people at this age group compared to other groups. As well, gender was quite different between subgroups. As you can see, asylum and convention refugees were mainly males than females, whereas for family and Quota, there were almost half and half age for the gender. And just a quick slide on time to convention status, and that reflects on that stressful time that asylum seekers who became refugees here as convention refugees, they had to wait to receive their status. And as you can see, about 25% of those who came like in recent, so before 2012 and after 2012 is just because I wanted to look at the more recent data and see if there is a difference. Still more than 35%, they had been waiting for more than 2 years to receive their status. You might have heard about NZ deprivation. So I used multiple deprivation index here, which is the same as NZDEP, but it's using more criteria. It's looking at, so the main criteria for this one is employment and income, for which each of them are contributing 28%, and then is education and health, and then it's crime, housing, and access. So IMD, or Index of Multiple Deprivation, is using 7 criteria and is using actually Census and the geography address in the Census and the mesh blocks in the Census. And so, and using all of these information about that neighborhood to develop this index. So I'm introducing this index because later on, I want to tell you the story about where are refugees, their first address and their last address that I found through IDI, what is about their IMD and like the deprivation index of where they've been resettled in and lived. So this is just an overview of where about refugees or different subgroups of refugees are settling in. So the darker the green, the more people are staying in, and as you can see, like more than 20% of refugees are of asylum convention and families are living in Auckland. For Quota refugees, more than 20% also of Quota refugees are living in Wellington. The rest are quite smaller numbers in the rest of the New Zealand. This is interesting because refugees are being sent to all parts of New Zealand, many settlement areas, as well, like in southern part. We have refugees settling in Invercargill, and Dunedin, but you see that like later on, many of them move up to the main cities. Deprivation index level of first address and last address, I'm going to show you just to compare. So the darker, again, the color, it shows higher deprivation. So the deprivation was between 1 to 10. 8 to 10 is the darker, 1 to 3 is the lighter, and then the numbers in between are the orange one in the between. So as you can see, for Quota refugees, more than nearly 70% of them were living in the first address, which shows this is where they've been sent to. They are resettled in, and they were resettled in high deprivation areas. It's lower for asylum and convention because there wasn't a settlement strategy for them introduced. So I should have explained this earlier, but for Quota refugees, there is a resettlement program for them. When they arrive in the country, in the first 5 weeks, they go to this to the Mangere Center, where they are being introduced to about the main services they can access to in New Zealand, like mental health services, education services. They are being explained about how policy is working. So, and they've been screened for some of these, like health screenings and other stuff. So, but this is not the same for family and convention refugees. And so, yeah. So family refugees, when they arrive in the country, again, where they are living is mostly dependent on where the support person is living in. So that's how it's explained. And the convention and asylum seekers, that's their own, where they live is based on their own decision. The last address, as you can see, the difference is not, at least you can't see much differences. So the comparison between these two figures tells us that wherever we settle refugees or wherever they are settled in, it's more likely to be they are staying in that areas. If they are being settled in high deprivation areas, they're more likely to stay in those high deprivation areas. If we look at, then we looked at number of addresses changed. So it's not moving from city to city, number of addresses are changed. And then we are looking at deprivation of those addresses as they move through. As you can see, they're highly likely to move, especially convention refugees moved a lot, not as much Quota or family, but still about 40 to 50% of all refugee subgroups were moving houses. But looking at addresses that they moved to, this first graph is about asylum seekers. This red area is showing high deprivation. This one is medium deprivation, and this one is low deprivation. This is showing where they're moving to. For example, this one is moving from low deprivation to high deprivation in the second address. And then you can see that, for example, these ones are moving from high deprivation to medium deprivation. And again, going back, part of them, like 10% of them are going back to high deprivation. So this is the deprivation level as they move to. These ones, the gray one shows those people who didn't move past this. So this is the first move. These people didn't move. And then from these people, these proportions didn't move. And then these proportions moved too. As you can see, for asylum seekers, they moved a lot. But they generally moved to higher or medium deprivation. And we don't see any improvement, like in saying more people moving to low deprivation areas. And this is for asylum seeker subgroup. Convention refugees are largely similar to asylum seekers, as you can see. The story for family and Quota, I go quickly because it's again quite similar. But you can see for Quota refugees, the high proportions who've been settled in high deprivation level areas, neighborhoods, and then you can see that there are still a lot of them are still ending up being in high deprivation areas. Then we looked at the proportions of people who ever accessed housing in New Zealand, and as you can see, this is interesting because all refugees should be supported by Housing New Zealand, and they should be actually resettled in some of those houses when they arrive. So, and that explains why Quota refugees have been receiving. So this is ever receiving a Housing New Zealand facilities access housed in New Zealand or didn't. And you can see that the proportion is much higher for quota refugees than other subgroups of refugees. I also looked at mental health service access, and this is just specialist mental health service access. This is Prime, using Prime. And then I looked at by different refugee subgroups, and again, significantly more likely, quota refugees were significantly more likely to access, and they access actually more than the other subgroups. And these results when doing a model remained significantly higher for quota refugees and lower. So this is one. Anything less than one, they are significantly less likely to access mental health services, and anything more than one, they are more likely to access mental health services. And that's for gender. Women were more likely to access. And all refugee subgroups were less likely to access compared to quota refugees. It was interesting because at address change, also mobility was significantly important here, as those people without address change or with versus like those with 1 to 2 address changes, they were less likely to access mental health services. But what remained significant in all results, whether it was for mental health or income, as I get to that point, was deprivation. So those people in higher deprivation neighborhood, they were more likely to access mental health services than the low deprivation neighborhood. And the same was true when I get to the income data, you'll see the same was true for that. Now for income data, this is total income. This is total income, so that includes benefit as well. And this is just comparing different refugee subgroups. As you can see, the most important thing I think in this slide is the importance of the first 5 or 6 years, as they are improving in their income. But what is again obvious is that their support is required past that point. Is just after 5 years we need support, because the total income at least didn't increase for people. But because many refugees are on benefits, we looked at also as so then again median income by age of arrival. So those people who were younger, in the younger age groups, they had a better outcome over the years. So their story, the success story is more clear than those people who arrived in the later years, like in the 50 to 65-year-old. Comparing the income of refugees with immigrants and New Zealand born, and this slide shows the significant income gap between these groups. So I had to actually have a start point for New Zealand born as well. So the start point was 1997, and I looked at income from 2000 to 2019. So the people who are here are quite smaller than people. You know, that's why the New Zealand born has this drop. But I mean, this is the clear income gap for total income of refugees. And as you can see, like even the best ones, asylum seekers are not refugees. For refugees, the best ones, in the best case, conventional refugees were earning a median income was 25,000. Then I just looked at wages and salaries. So I thought, okay, so those people who were working, refugees who were working, what's the story? What's the success stories? It's been much better for them. So they've been earning much better over time from their arrival. I mean, despite being, there are some differences between different refugee groups, but this is telling a success story to me. However, still their income is quite different from the general population, even after 15 years, 20 years. Then I looked at registration. So I thought, okay, so if we are looking at those people who are working, their wages and salaries, and if I want to just include the one variable for in the model, for the final model, to look into the income and see how much like education is affecting. For refugees, we didn't have a very good information on education for when they arrive in the country. Those people who started, many of them didn't finish their studies. So I thought the best variable is registration with Ministry of Education. And as you can see, Quota refugees have been registered quite highly. About 70% of all the cohort in the Quota have been registering. And this is again a good news. This shows that their access to education was better. However, there is still a huge gap between different refugee subgroups. Then we looked at, for those people who we had in education information, so their education is mainly from census data, Census 2018. If they hadn't responded to 2018 census, we used Census 2013. If there was no information there, we use Ministry of Education information if they had earned any, if they had attended and earned any level of education over there. If nothing there, we looked at Ministry of Social Development data on education. And as you can see, it's interesting because the intersection of gender, gender years being in New Zealand and income shows that it seems like for the earlier years, having a better education or university graduation didn't help refugees, at least male refugees, as much. And it was basically years, how many years they've been in the country, which contributed to having better outcomes and better income. More or less, it was similar for females as well. We also looked at conversational English, as we had one question in census asking whether people are comfortable speaking in having a conversational English in any language. If they pick English, they could have picked several languages if they pick English. So we are looking at that, and not surprisingly, those people with a better conversational English were earning more money. And this is again wages and salaries for those people who were working. So looking at proportions of refugees whose main income was benefit, here, as you can see, again, when I've discussed about this with one of the professors in the University of Auckland, who's an economist, she said this is a success story because they quickly dropped. A number of people who were on benefit, solely on benefit, quickly dropped, and that is a good news. But still, quite a few refugees from different groups, especially from Quota refugees, they were on their main income was on benefit. It doesn't suggest that they weren't working, but the amount of money that they were earning wasn't as much as the benefit money. And looking at this graph for the wages and salaries as the main source of income, again, you can see that refugees are growing in their income, these three, so Quota, family, and convention refugees. They are growing in their income in the first 5 to 6 years, but it looks like the figure doesn't go up any further after that point. I think this is really important message for policymakers if they want to intervene and help refugees and understand how they can help refugees to grow in their work and in the labor market, then they can use these results. Then again, this is for each subgroups of refugees. I looked at, I also included self-employed here for asylum. So I mean, over the years, I mean, you can see they are crossing this line. So refugees the number of refugees who are earning money are on wages and salaries is increasing, and then the number on benefit is decreasing over time. So this, at least for asylum, for convention refugees, this is a really good story for all of them anyway. They're growing slowly over the years. And we know from the literature that many refugees who start in a new country, in their early years, they are starting the survival jobs. And they stay in those survival jobs for many years. And this is the first generation refugees. I have to just say it again, that we are not looking at children of refugees who are growing. This is the first generation, those who are arriving here as adults. And it is very likely that they didn't have to, because this is just administrative data. We didn't talk to refugees to know the reasons. But it is very likely that, from the literature, very likely that they had to stay in those survival jobs in the long term and for a long time before they can take on studies and before they can improve in their work. And the same is for quota refugees. You can see that quickly a number of quota refugees on benefit drops here, and a number of them on wages and salaries increases quickly over 3-4 years. But afterwards, again, the numbers are stagnating where they are. And it's really interesting to do some qualitative study to see why we are seeing here. So we wanted to understand why is the income gap between refugees and the New Zealand born. So we thought we are looking at census data, which provides a little bit more information about the type of jobs they are doing, and just comparing that with the type of job that immigrants in New Zealand born are doing. As you can see here, about 27% of immigrants versus about 11% of refugees are professionals, whereas for laborers, about 25% of them are laborers, whereas compared with 8% of immigrants. This explains to some extent the age gap between these groups. And then we looked at at least a few of these roles, and looking at different groups to see whether refugees are earning less or more. But just to note that this is the highest level of jobs. So like a manager of a big company or manager of a small shop, we are just picking the main one, the first one. And again, as you can see, for refugees are earning the lower range incomes as compared to other groups, and here in the higher range, refugees are quite different from the other two subgroups, New Zealand born and immigrants. And this is just for the professionals. The story is the same again. About 20% of refugees are earning more than 100,000 as professionals, compared with 27% of immigrants. Hours of work in our model, hours of work was significant and made a huge difference in terms of this income gap between refugees and other groups. And there are quite some refugees who were working fewer hours, and that was a difference that was significant, remains significant in the model that we're on. This is for those who've been ever working. So just considering and controlling for years being in New Zealand, years living in New Zealand, we looked at the length of employment for refugees. And we found out that the most important variables that actually increased that length of employment for refugees and was a successful variable that was a successful factor for refugees was registration. So who registered was more likely to stay in their jobs for longer times, stay in any job in longer time. And again, the probation here contributed to lower months being employed in New Zealand for refugees. Just to summarize what I presented, I just quickly presented the main settlement outcomes of refugees, not all of them, but some of them. But the thing was which is important, is refugees are refugee. Refugees from different groups shouldn't be different from each other in terms of, for government at least, in terms of providing support for them. So, and that was a big gap between different refugee subgroups in terms of these supports, at least access to the support provided to them. So for conventional families, they are entitled to the same supports provided to Quota refugees, but in practice, we see that they haven't access as much. And again, even for those people who were in work, we've seen a huge gap between refugees and other groups in New Zealand. In the literature, we see after 8 to 10 years, refugees are catching up with immigrants in New Zealand, in other countries, in European countries. In New Zealand, we don't see that catch-up is happening. The gap remains as we go through years from arrival, at least for those people who've been in the country for 22 years or 20 years in the study, we can see that gap still exists. So this is a really important message for policymakers to look into why that's the case. And again, this is just administrative data. So we didn't talk to refugees. It should be this data should be accompanied by qualitative measures, qualitative studies to ask refugees how they feel, what are the problems that they're encountering, and that's where we should take it further. I want to thank the Auckland Medical Research Foundation this year for providing me with support with this fellowship to do further mental health studies. I'm looking into other sources for mental health access of refugees. I will be looking into pharmacological data as well, which is providing our understanding of how many people have been accessing primary healthcare. And just acknowledging everyone who helped us in this journey since last year, 2 years ago, especially the refugee advisory group. Sue Elliott has been helping me a lot in understanding why I see what I see in the immigration database about refugees and the decision being made on their case. As well, the first people who helped me in the way were Immigration New Zealand Research and Willis team. They've been helping me to either respond my questions about immigration database or direct me to the right person in the immigration. Thank you. And that's a photo from Iran, from a city that my grandfather was born in when it was silent and it was a peaceful country, unlike now.
Hi, I'm Robin from Twitter. I had a question about, so you looked at mental health access, right? So in Australia, I think one thing that's been noticed is the federal government tried to resettle people in rural areas and remote, and then they made them stay for a year. But as soon as the year was up, they all left Melbourne and Sydney. And part of that was mental health access, but also partly they did not settle them in areas with other refugees from the same community. And I was wondering if that's something that you found in your data set as well, or whether that was
I haven't got into that details. I should do this. We are looking at regions. In New Zealand, as far as I know, they've been resettled within areas that other ethnic groups also are living. Like a lot of Colombians are being sent to the south, where there are other families from Colombia living there. We are looking into the regions, and we are looking into the second level ethnic group as well for the access to mental health databases. I don't have that information right now to give you, but that's something that we are looking into to understand. Thanks. That was a good question.
I've got a couple of comments and
Sure.
one question. The first comment is about the access to housing, state housing, public housing. I know that the people who apply for housing, a very small percentage of those people actually get the public and state housing. So it would be interesting to see how many have actually applied. And I think MSC was it registry or register, and they keep a record of how many people who have applied versus how many people who have actually gotten it. So that's just the comment that I had,
Mhm.
and I bet that the numbers will look really different. Another comment that I had was on the trend of median income. So, it seems that the median income has dropped in the last year or so, for all the different categories. And it would be really interesting to like figure out what the reason might be. Maybe there was a new benefit.
Smaller number of people, smaller number of people in the country, a small number of people representing that last year.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Another comment that I had was on when you were looking at immigrants versus refugees and what profession they were in. I think it would, because if you're looking at immigrants, it would be immigrants usually that come into New Zealand, that is based on immigration policies.
Yeah.
So we would expect.
Yeah, of course,
A
yeah.
high percentage of those would be professional, because the others might not be able to come into New Zealand and get those lower jobs. So that comparison might not be like fairly correct.
Yeah, that's why we put in NZ-born as well. As you can see, even NZ-born or the main ones have the highest proportions for professionals here. Yeah, 23% about.
Just a quick question, when you talk about the median income, what does the percentages mean? So 100% means what, and 0% means what?
So if their income, actual income, this is the number is median income. But here is the proportions of people whose main source of income has been benefit. It doesn't say level of income.
There's one from the chat. What does registered with education include? Is this attainment, enrollment, tertiary and IT? You mentioned census as the source of this variable. I'm not sure if you did, but do you remember the question asked there? It's about your registered with education variable.
Registered for education was for any registration. So even ITO is included. So any
From education
yes,
data.
Okay. But the other question I think refers to the education attained.
That's census.
Yeah, that's census. That's census first. If nothing in census found for that person, I looked into MOE and then MSD.
Okay, so for registered with education, that's a Ministry of Education variable. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you
very much.
Chiara.